Okay, we'll call the special meeting of the Planning Commission to order. We'll begin with the pledge to the flag, please. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Jess, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Tiedemann.
Here.
Mr. Varga.
Here.
Mr. Cicero.
Here.
Mr. Cook.
Here.
Mr. Perkovic is excused. Mr. Sidoti.
Here.
Mr. Snow.
Here. We have a public hearing this evening, which is why I'm assuming all you folks are here. What we do is we allow the applicant an opportunity to tell us what they want to do at a particular location. Then those wishing to speak in favor are afforded a similar opportunity. Then those wishing to speak against or just have questions are given an opportunity for that. So before we start that, Kathy, did you want to make a comment?
I thought it would be a good idea, Mr. Chairman, just to kind of give a quick overview of the plan development overlay regulations. These are new regulations that were adopted in July of this year, which replaced the previous plan unit development regulations that were on the books. The purpose and intent of revising the regulations was to provide more definitive standards for plan developments than what was previously written, while still offering some flexibility in uses, densities, and dwelling types, shared services and facilities, and creating quality and attractive developments through design guidelines and purposeful building arrangements. Plan developments are intended to achieve the following items, in part. A mix of complementary land uses based on the size of the development in relationship to surrounding uses to create economic vitality within the community. Encourage skillful planning while promoting coordinated architectural design within a unified development area. Encourage projects that respect and incorporate natural characteristics of the site and surrounding area, protecting natural resources to the extent possible. Plan developments are intended to respond to the growing demand for a variety of housing choices that will meet the needs of various age groups, from empty nesters to millennials, and also offer neighborhoods with improved walkability, personal services, and even possibly proximity to work that might otherwise be difficult to achieve under a traditional zoning district regulation. So just to give a quick overview of the process that this particular project is going to undertake, this is a zoning amendment application and review that is combined with preliminary site plan approval. So the first step in the process is an informal review for plan feedback, which the applicant has already conducted with the Planning Commission. Then they submit a formal rezone application with preliminary plan that's reviewed by the Planning Commission at a public hearing, who then makes a recommendation to City Council. City Council then considers the rezone and preliminary plan submission at another public hearing and votes on the submission when they see appropriate. Because of the C1 Conservation District designation on the property, any proposed zoning change will be subject to voter referendum at the next general election following approval. Following that, should the plan be approved and the voters accept the plan, final site development plan approval will begin at that point and follow, again, only if approved by the voters of the city, which will then go into the more detailed and, again, finalization of the development plan components. So if anybody has any questions in regard to that, I'm happy to answer them, but hopefully that helps clear some things up.
Any questions, commissioners? Okay, is spokesman for the applicant here? Why don't you give us an overview of what you'd like to accomplish at that location?
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my name is Chris Herman. I'm a principal with MKSK, here representing the Bolton family and the Bolton project team. First, I would like to say to the Planning Commission and staff, thank you for being willing to do this special meeting. It means a lot to the family and to all of us that you're willing to take this extra time to hear just this project tonight. I would also like to thank all the residents for being interested in coming out to hear more about this project. We are excited to share with you the development plan for the Bolton property. I have about 30 slides here. I can go through relatively quickly. I think it will help facilitate probably discussion and provide answers. I could go through it and then we could have question and answer. I could go through it and you could have dialogue as we go, whatever is your preference.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and start?
Okay, all right, great. So this is just to say the summary I'm going to provide here in about 30 slides. I'm going to give you a quick overview of the site, what we're trying to do tonight, what we're asking to do, and then provide a little bit of a quick overview of the site characteristics, most of which you already saw at the informal hearing, but I thought it would be helpful for the community watching and the community in the audience to understand, and then get into the development program that we are proposing tonight. So first, an overview. The Bolton property is sited here. It's at the corner of Johnny Cake and Center Street with 90 on the south. And so this gives you an orientation of the property. You can also see that not all of the property is within the city of Mentor limits, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a few minutes. So I want to share with you the family's vision for the site, what we're trying to achieve. It's important to keep this in mind as you review this. So it's really important to the family to preserve the heritage and legacy of this site. And in particular, that's the 69-acre conservation area. And so one of the family's visions is to preserve this conservation area in perpetuity as a publicly accessible amenity. And so we'll talk about that here more as well. A second major part of the family's vision, which is on the next slide, is to create a complementary residential neighborhood as part of this that provides a variety of multi-generational housing options. Again, that responds to the planned development text and the intent of the city in doing this, again, to provide for current and future generations of Mentor. The third major point is that we want to establish an inviting central gathering place that's walkable as a mixed-use village center that provides essential services for this area, the surrounding neighbors, housing options again, and jobs for the residents of Mentor. And then finally, we want to create a welcoming gateway. We understand this is one of the gateways into Mentor. We want to create a welcoming gateway from I-90 and as part of the proposed Cleveland Clinic facility. And then just to reinforce how important the woods are to this property, I think, and to the community, the Western Land Conservancy is in an agreement with the Boltons as to preserve this conservation area in perpetuity. And again, you can see the quote from Richard Cochran, the president, talking about how important and how significant this land is. And this is a really important piece of this project, is to preserve these wooded lands and the past for the public and the community. So a quick summary of site characteristics. Again, Kathy did a fantastic job just summarizing the intent of the planned unit mixed-use development. Overlay, again, we're trying to do a master plan for a large area that fits together so all the pieces relate to promote the efficient layout, including uses, densities, and dwelling types. We're trying to get an economy of scale and services here, and again, protect the natural resources on the site. And again, maybe to put a finer point in this, tonight, the purpose of this application is to share with you how we're achieving the purposes and objectives of the planned development overlay, and to convey to you the street network, the blocks, the uses, the density proposed for this development. And then we also include specific design standards and character areas to help the community and all of you understand what we're proposing for this site. Just to return again to the site context, actually, if you go to the next slide, we'll zoom in. As you all know, development is occurring around this site. We had Knoll Creek development on the west side of Center Street, and now we have a proposed Cleveland Clinic site further to the south along Center Street. So development is starting to happen around this site, and between protecting the green space and responding to this development, that's really where this plan comes into play. I mentioned that not all of the site is in the city of Mentor, so we have a total site of 238 acres. Of that, 186.5 acres are in the city of Mentor. This 186.5 acres is what we are asking to be rezoned for your consideration to the PMUD district. Existing site conditions, you can see in green is existing tree cover, so again, you can see the significance of the woods. You can also see some of the tree lines. You can see the entry to the existing Bolton Estate today that is just a little bit north of the Norton Parkway. We have some drainage swales and streams that run along Johnny Cake Ridge Road and also to the south, heading west towards Center Street. And then again, a really significant piece of this is the conservation area. This will be preserved in perpetuity by the Western Reserve Land Conservancy as a public amenity. There's an existing trail network in there that will also be preserved and will be publicly accessible. The total conservation area per the agreement is 69 acres. Of that 69 acres, 35 acres are in the city of Mentor and are part of this rezoning. I think you all had a chance to go visit the site and see its significance. Again, we have signature heritage trees on this site. It's a fantastic habitat. It's a really important piece, I think, of the heritage of both this site and the city of Mentor. Also, just to provide some scale and reference, on the left and middle are existing public parks within the city of Mentor. You can see their acreage and their sizes and scale. This is all to the same scale, and you can compare that with the conservation area being proposed here, the 69 acres. One of the things we're trying to do, I think, as a segue, is not just preserve the 69 acres, but actually embrace it with the development and kind of respect it as part of this. So it actually is, there's some interaction, and I think you'll see that in our site plan. So from a technical point of view, we have divided this area into 4 sub-areas. Sub-area D is the conservation area. And then we work on basically respecting the surrounding development, the residential development in sub-area A, and then we increase from residential use in sub-area A to a mixed use, again, the village center, walkable village center in sub-area B, and then to sub-area C, which is the gateway into the city of Mentor. A little more detail again. You saw this was in the informal, the alignment, the row patterns, kind of the existing framework, how we have this residential neighborhood and then a shared mixed-use center, and then the commercial area to the south. So getting into more details. The street pattern, you can see here, we're proposing what we're calling right now Street A. When we come back with final development plan, we'll obviously have names, but Street A is the spine of this development. It doesn't actually ever connect to the outside streets. It is basically a walkable main way of getting between the various parts of this development. And so it hugs in part the conservation area and really provides scale and orientation to the development. It connects sub-areas A and B and C. Access to this development is along, the primary one is along an extension of Norton Parkway into the site. You can see that in the middle in red. And that's really where we're focusing this village center, along that piece. We have also proposed what we're calling on the Street B, which is an access point further to the south. It is just north of the Ohio Department of Transportation Limited Access Way. It is across the stream corridor. It's I think the best place in terms of spacing between the interchange and Norton Parkway to still allow development. And we also placed it in a way, just looking at how we would develop the Cleveland Clinic site, in a way that I think responds and helps facilitate their development, because I think they're going to want an access point right about there from both the topography on both sides of Center Street. So those are the 2 main ways into the mixed-use development, sub-areas B and C, that we're proposing. We also have shown a Street C, which aligns with the right-in, right-out access point to Knoll Creek. And then we've proposed a Street D and a Street E that connect to Johnny Cake Ridge Road. And those 3 streets are really more residential to serve that sub-area A. It does connect into Street A, that spine, but it's really more to provide access to that residential neighborhood and to connect into the conservation area. They were color-coded green and red. We've put character typologies to show you what the street character is of those various streets. So the green residential streets are designed to be 2-way traffic with on-street parallel parking. street trees and a tree lawn and sidewalks along those. And then the development, the residential development to either side. And then on the mixed use sections, the red streets, that's Street A, the Norton Parkway extension, and Street B, these would have on-street parking. We have bump outs for easier pedestrian crossing. Again, we have street trees, but it's a little more hardscape here because we're trying to encourage strolling, outdoor dining, and seating. And here, the commercial and residential buildings are close, will be close and kind of create a nice envelope with the street, so you can again go by active first floor retail space, commercial space, and residential space. The open space framework, again, we've talked about the conservation area. This is showing there's a number of features here on the site that we're working to integrate into this development. First, I'll start with the mound that runs around the exterior of the property along Johnny Cake Ridge Road and along Center Street. In subarea A, we are preserving this mound as a buffer and separation. We'll also put a public trail along this that will help serve this development and the community. There is a beautiful tree-lined entry drive today that goes to the Bolton house. It is just north of Norton Parkway. There's no way we could turn that into a street because of the site distance between Norton Parkway, existing Norton Parkway intersection. But we do want to preserve that and honor that. So we're showing that as a pathway that helps connect the rest of the community and people coming down Center Street and along Norton Parkway to the conservation area. You also notice we've worked hard with this layout to honor the original Bolton estate, the existing Bolton estate, as a centerpiece, a focal point of this development, and as kind of a gateway into the conservation area. We've also, as I mentioned earlier, there's a stream there to the south that runs to the west, and that is really an important feature. We're preserving that, leaving it daylighted, and again, that is kind of the break line between the subarea B and subarea C areas. I'd also like to mention, it came up in discussion, how does the community public access the conservation area? It's a little bit hard to see on the slide, but we have orange dots as proposed. Doesn't mean they're going to be exactly there, but proposed trailheads where you would enter the conservation area and use the existing trail network. Again, that would have to be worked out with the Western Land Conservancy. Some of those, it would probably make sense to put a small parking lot for the community to park there. But you also remember we have the Street A that kind of hugs the conservation area and the Bolton house. That will have on-street parking, so people will be able to park on the park side, on street, along the length of that street, and use that as a way to then walk along the pathways and enter the conservation area. So this is an illustrative plan. You'll see renderings on the left-hand side. I know they're small here. We'll show you full screen once here as I go through this, showing subarea A, subarea B, and subarea C. The plan view here is then saying, all right, taking the conceptual plan and showing how it could lay out. This is a development plan, again, showing subarea A, B, and C, and the conservation area, how it all works together in the framework we've outlined. And now I'm going to walk through each sub-area in more detail. So subarea A, the northern portion, the residential neighborhood, again, this is designed to be a walkable residential neighborhood. We're trying to provide housing types that really are underrepresented in the city of Mentor, but are also desired in the marketplace. These are really multi-generational kinds of development. What we're trying to create are several different typologies, but this is predominantly porch-fronted homes. So you're walking along the front of homes. We don't have garages off the main streets. They're alley access garages. So that allows the lots to be narrower because you're not trying to accommodate a drive from the street. You're accommodating it from the rear alley into a garage. And you can really create great houses and great porches that help create that wonderful walkable community. You can see architectural inspiration there of the kinds of housing we're hoping to attract to this area. Also mentioned there's kind of a 4 typology. We'll talk about this more. You'll see estate lot locations at the very northeast corner. Those are the larger lots. And then we transition to single family residential. Again, it's these porch fronted homes with rear alley access. Then they get to a little bit smaller lot size as we move south, and then in that gray zone along Street A are townhouses. They, again, look out across Street A and into the park space and across into the Bolton estate. Should be really beautiful, a really nice setup. Hopefully you'll also notice that the streets all kind of go into Street A, the access streets, so Street C, D, and E, with terminating vistas of the park or the estate. So as you come into this development, you're getting great vistas of the conservation area, beautiful green space, park space. Again, that enhances the quality of this development. One of the comments that came up in the staff report, this wasn't in your materials, but we wanted to provide it tonight to help answer some questions. Again, you can see these 4 residential typologies, the yellow being the estate lots, the A and B being these single-family porch-fronted homes, and then the purple being the proposed townhouse locations. One of the things that did come up, and we can circle back to this, I'm sure we'll have some discussion, is the setbacks. Obviously, with townhouse homes, you're putting townhouses close together, so there isn't separation between these units. It's basically the row of townhouses that then have side yard separation. The smaller lots, again, because we don't have drives in the front, we're having narrower spacing between buildings. Again, it's to create that great walkable neighborhood character, so we can get into these setbacks. But we're really trying to create a wonderful walkable space for the community and different kinds of housing types than you have today in Mentor. Just to give you a sense, these are examples of this kind of scale of the type of housing we're talking about. You can see it in built condition. You can see how it works. You can see how these respond and the character and architecture we're trying to create in this neighborhood. So then here's a larger illustration of sub-area A. We are looking northwest towards Center Street and Johnny Cake Ridge Road, over the existing pond and over the existing Bolton residence into sub-area A. You can see the green space, park space. You can see Street A as kind of that boundary that hugs the park and the residence. Sub-area B, again, we're trying to create a community gathering place, both for this development and for the community. Really important framework points here are we're trying to create building line streets, active first floors, so ground floor retail, particularly along Norton Parkway, walkable neighborhood, mix of residential and commercial uses. There'll be places, particularly as you move, you can see, move to the east, where it's predominantly residential, but along Norton Parkway, along Street A in this section, we'll have mixes of residential, first floor retail, commercial office. There'll be residential above or office above, depending on the market and location. Another really important point, the surface parking is internal to the blocks, and the blocks are surrounded by buildings. So as you stroll or walk through this neighborhood, you don't experience the surface parking. You're walking by buildings and activity and outdoor dining. There is some on-street parking here, so people can park there. It's kind of a buffer between pedestrians, but again, really creating this traditional neighborhood village center feel. Again, reinforcing this point of view, again, you can see the dark red, we're trying to say this is the building envelope, and the center is where the parking occurs, and we really create this great tree line, building line, framed streets at the center of this development. I guess other things just to mention, the streets, I think it's important to point out, the streets have sidewalks, we have street trees, we'll have amenities here for benches. We're trying to encourage outdoor dining to occur, particularly along the Norton Parkway portion of this sub-area. And again, great architecture, great feel where people want to be and live and stroll and visit. Another thing we've added that came up, I think, in comments from the community, and we want to make sure we address this. I think there's some concern about why would we consider any retail in this area. We already have retail along Mentor, we have the mall, and we just want to make sure we help everyone understand that what we're proposing here is a much different kind of retail. We're not talking about a power center, we're not talking about a mall, we're talking about smaller retail uses designed to serve the neighborhood, the greater area, and that area that's very walkable, very place-based, outdoor parks and seating areas. So this is really more of an experiential place than it is a shopping center that you're trying to go to as a destination. There's a place you might go to eat or to get some basic services in the neighborhood. So this is an illustration. looking directly east from Center Street down what we propose as an extended Norton Parkway. And you can see up there on the front, on the left hand, which would be the north side of the road, is a green space, shelter house, probably restaurant, where we can have community events, community gatherings here. And then you can see this nice street that's lined with buildings. Again, we'd have restaurants and nice first floor spaces, again, office, residential above, that creates this nice community town, walkable, strollable environment at the center of this development. Subarea C is the mixed-use commercial area. It's really very similar in terms of what's being proposed use-wise to Subarea B. In fact, I think one of the commissioners commented last time, do we combine subareas B and C? We thought about that. In general, they're very similar. We just wanted to represent here that the development pattern changes a little bit in C, where we probably have a larger reservoir of parking. Again, the buildings are trying to respond to subarea B, but this is probably going to be areas where we have the medical office buildings that respond and build the economy of the proposed Cleveland Clinic across the street. This is where you would have a hotel use probably that would respond to the proximity to the interchange, as well as visitors coming to the Cleveland Clinic and to this area of Mentor. So again, I think it's possible a hotel could happen in B, or a bed and breakfast, or those kinds of things, but we want to give you a sense that it's a little bit different kind of scale in relationship between the buildings and parking in subarea C. But it's a great gateway into the community. Here's a rendering looking from that interchange point. So now we're looking north and east into subarea C, and you can see subarea B at the top. They're showing this kind of development pattern again, the hotel up front, medical office buildings potentially, and the reservoir parking in the center. But again, what you experience as a commuting public driving through this area, or as a visitor coming in here, is a great gateway entry, nice setbacks, the street trees, and then strollable sidewalks and multi-use paths. So that is the quick overview, and now prepared to answer questions from all of you or from the community.
Okay. Now we'll go to the audience participation part. You want to hand me the pink sheets, please? We've had several people that asked to speak here. William Lennon. Is he here? Oh, okay, well, I'll take those at some point. Larry, would you gather those?
That wasn't me, but I'm sure I know.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Bill Lennon. I live at 8447 Johnny Cake Ridge Road, 4 doors east of 615. I've lived there since 1961. And in those 58 years, I've seen a lot of changes. And I was lucky to live across from that beautiful estate all those years. And I know everything has to change. And when I heard about and read in the paper about this plan, you know, with all that conservancy and the land being set aside and saved, that was one aspect that I think is really beneficial to everyone. I have two questions, or three. One would be with the population density to change here. Okay, will the Center Street and 84, do you anticipate have to be widened again? That's one of my questions. And with the sewer system that we presently have, do you anticipate having to enlarge that when you have all of these new developments hooking into that? And the third question I had, I believe I read where about 50 acres will be zoned residential on the north end of the estate, which would be on Johnny Cake. And the gentleman kind of answered the question I was concerned. Will there be apartments there, or will there be, he mentioned townhouses and I think cluster homes. I think that's, I got it understood correctly. But I was just wondering if, you know, when I drive on 90 going into, say, Willoughby on 91, you see those 10-story apartment buildings. And I wondered if something like that is to be anticipated, especially along 90. I think, or the pictures show maybe 2 3-story buildings. So those are my questions.
Okay, we'll get answers for your questions.
Those are great questions. So why don't you stay here and remind me, make sure I hit them all. All right. So I know you asked about sewer. I think it's probably, I didn't say it, but I should probably tell you, we did utilities and sewer study, and basically what it says is, we gave them more than we've actually shown here, more density, just to make sure it could work. And we were told by basically all the utility providers that there is enough for the higher numbers that we gave them, as opposed to what we're showing here in this plan. So with the present sewer. You asked about traffic. We've done an initial traffic study as part of the final development plan, which would come after the rezoning. We have to get into really, precise details. What it looks like is that we can accommodate the traffic here. There might be some needs to widen at the intersection. So basically, roadways carry capacity. The places where the roadways have the biggest problems are when you have left turns. So that's why sometimes there's right in, right out restrictions. And so that's why sometimes you'll see when new developments happen, they add a center turn lane. So there's a chance possibly that we'll be having need to add a center turn lane at some of these intersections as part of the project. So that was the streets, the sewer. You asked about
The
taller buildings. Yes. So according to the city code, plan development code, 60 feet is the maximum height you can go. We've proposed only 40 feet in sub-area A, so that's the area near you. So nothing can be taller than 40 feet. And also remember, we're keeping the berms all the way around, so there's going to be that. So that means basically 2 stories. You probably really won't see the homes there. In sub-areas B and C, we have it 60 feet, which is the code maximum. That doesn't mean we're intending to do that, but that means some buildings, probably particularly in sub-area C, might go up to 60 feet. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so, yeah, Larry, if you don't mind. So we've shown 2 access points on Johnny Cake. There you go. Great, thank you. You can see right there where it says Johnny Cake Ridge Road, there's a street connection there. And then over as we move to the east, there's another one before we get into the turn. So those would be what we're talking about as 2 proposed street connections. I think, again, we can have more discussion. It's probably worth sharing with all of you. When you have more access points to a development, it actually disperses traffic. So by having a few more street connections here, we're actually lowering the number of vehicles on any one point of entry. So we're actually trying to distribute the traffic rather than concentrating on one side. Okay.
The part of the land that's on the hills. Okay.
Yes.
Now, that's mostly going to be conservancy or single family?
Correct. So the question was the land in Kirtland Hills. It is not part of this rezoning. It would stay zoned per Kirtland Hills. So that requires 5-acre residential lots. So that would be the most that could be built on those. And as you can see, a large section of the acreage in Kirtland Hills is actually being put into the conservation area.
Very much, sir. And every plan has, the developers, when they start, they always have to tweak them. So I guess as residents, we're relying on you, the planning commission, and the council when it comes to some of these minor changes to use due diligence. And if we go by your past record, you've done pretty good.
Okay, thanks. Bob Quayle.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. First of all, the citizens turned down a development just west of this last year. Now we're back here with the same thing. It's overdeveloped. First of all, it's, if nothing, it's at least 2 to 3 years premature, because I live on Johnny Cake. Right where he has his exit on Johnny Cake is right in my front yard. So that's going to be really pleasant. Number 2, you haven't addressed the problems that already existed there. Every morning and every afternoon, for at least an hour, sometimes an hour and a half, it is a parking lot on both streets, off and on. It's miserable. I'm serious. It goes way back up the curve. And God help you if there's a garbage truck or a bus, school bus. There are children, young children there, that are, they're always in the front yard, because that's what they got, and I'm fearful someday some child's going to be killed. And that needs to be addressed now, before we open the door and let the wolf in the kitchen house. All right? And I've seen this before, and you've seen it before. You just drive down 271, look where Chagrin Boulevard is, and as you drive south of Chagrin, look over there to the overbuilding there. And what's going to happen eventually, you're going to take beautiful Mentor and turn it into Warrensville and North Randall. This needs to be tabled for at least 2 to 3 years. Because if you're going to have that, you're going to have 4-story houses and a 2-story berm, they should put up a thicker berm and make it higher. But the problem when you do that, runoff. There are people in this house, in this room, whose front yard drains, and they've got a lake for 2 days when we have our spring rains because of the 700-plus dump trucks that built that. Now, I've heard them say a lot about the green zone, and I'm a member of the Western Reserve Land Conservancy. I go out every May and help clean up the Grand River. And yes, they'll take what they can get. They'd like to take the whole property, because that would be better. Now, the other thing is, your green zone here is downwind from the heavy traffic air pollution. Now, I'm sorry, the 11,000 scientists yesterday said it's time to turn this around. Tearing down trees and increasing air pollution from cars is not smart. Think about your children and grandchildren. I'm 76. I'm worried about my grandkids. And this is not needed. We have businesses going out of business there are lots of vacant retail places in Mentor. This is not good for Mentor. It's good for them. This is ridiculous. You are turning Mentor into Warrensville Heights or North Randall. Remember when North Randall, that Holiday Inn was built and that shopping center was the biggest in the world? Where is it now? Where is it now, gentlemen? Lady, I didn't want to leave you out, sorry. It's just premature. This should not even come to vote, and if it comes to vote, I hope it's rejected. I've seen this before.
How would you pronounce that name?
I'm available for bar mitzvahs or weddings.
Loretta, help me with your last name. Neby. Thank you.
By the way, excuse me, 65% of the school levies were voted down Tuesday. What is this going to do for the schools of Mentor? They're already at capacity.
Okay. Go ahead.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This really stresses me out to think that the city of Mentor would allow this project to take place. We bought our house in 1991. I live at 8479 Johnny Cake, the 5th house from the corner of 615. I have watched I-90 be opened up to 615. I have watched 615 homes lose their front yards to a widening project. Like Bob said before, I live 5 houses from the corner. Last year, I contacted the police department, my councilman. There were 3 little girls next door who almost got plowed down by drivers. They're trying to run these lights. They're trying to make the lights. I mean, they're coming through here, and I have neighbors that can tell you, sometimes 50, 60 miles an hour all day long. It is a parking lot. It takes me 20 minutes on Monday morning to get out of my garage, out of my drive, to get to work. 20 minutes, nobody would let me out. If I pull out, I get hit both ways. It is not a parking lot on 84. And like Bob said, I witnessed it. My husband had a massive stroke and was taken to the hospital several times. At one point, the rescue squad had to sit because there was traffic sitting, and there was traffic coming, and there was traffic going, and there was no place for that rescue squad to go. The same thing with your plow trucks that plow 84. have to sit and wait for those cars to move out of the way so they can plow my road that my taxes pay for and the rest of these people. It is not right. And I mean no disrespect to the Boltons, but they never took into consideration, none of us, when they put those big mounds of dirt around. They I'm quoting what they quote in the paper. They raised their families.
Ma'am.
They
it needs to
raised
come-
their
it
families.
needs to come this way.
They raised their families, and they appreciated the views of the pond, the pastures, and the woods. You know what my view is? A mound of dirt. 700 and some trucks was supposed to be taken from their property, was taken out of Eastlake. I followed them. I taped them. So, and they're supposed to beautify those mounds of dirt. We had the paperwork on it. We came right to City Hall. They showed us. Those mounds of dirt were not beautified and were not maintained like they were promised in their proposal to you. They're weeds. That's what my view is every day. I'm sorry. I am against this. I am with Bob. I think this should not take place. If anything, 5 years down the road, when we have time to think about this and think about what you're doing to our homes and how it's going to affect the property value of our homes. Thank you.
Mr. Zeman, would you explain the process that we go through here? This is not a City of Mentor project. It's a Bolton project. Would you explain it?
Yes, any property owner, it could be an acre, it could be 186 acres, has the right to make application and request the Planning Commission and ultimately the City Council, and in this particular case, the voters, due to mandatory referendum, consider a zoning change. So it's, in my profession, we say the doors of the courthouse are open to everyone. Well, here, in terms of being a property owner, the doors to a rezoning are open to everyone. Now, what the ultimate outcome is, that obviously is to be determined. But this is a process that all property owners can avail themselves of.
Okay, thank you. Mary Pumper.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I am a homeowner in Newell Creek, and I too am very opposed to this project. Can you hear me now? I should talk without this. I am a teacher. I truly do not need a microphone. But I will, just so that you can hear me. Okay, so I too am very opposed to this project. First of all, I'd just like to comment that I'm very disappointed in the city of Mentor as a whole. And as a planning commission, I hope I'm understanding it right, but you are responsible for deciding how we are going to use the property that we all have in the city of Mentor, correct? And how we are going to designate it for certain things such as commercial use, residential use. Is that true?
In part, the Planning Commission makes recommendations. Those recommendations ultimately are reviewed by the City Council. The City Council makes the decisions relative to what the Mentor ordinances should be, including zoning and the zoning map. There are instances where there's a mandatory referendum requirement for rezonings, and this is one of those occasions. So the people of Mentor have the ultimate final say relative to this property.
Okay. So my first thought is, why does the city of Mentor want to do away with every last inch of green space that we have in this community? I feel as though we are overdeveloped as it is, and any square inch that isn't right now seems to be up for grabs. I'm looking as I drive through the city of Mentor, a lot of vacant retail space that frankly is quite an eyesore. You go down by the Mentor Mall, Plaza Boulevard, and just all the vacant strip areas that we have just driving down Mentor Avenue. I mean, what's the plan for that? Why is that not being thought of as some redevelopment? Why are we going for just green space? I mean, I can't understand that. I mean, and yes, we were given a wonderful sounding plan, but again, I'm sure years ago when Newell Creek was first proposed, that, and I know for a fact that it was supposed to be all residential, and suddenly we have a Cleveland Clinic and with a 24-hour helipad that is going in. So that's quite different from what it started out to be. So when you're talking about a mixed-use commercial area here, That to me puts up a red flag. I mean, what the heck is that going to be? You know, right now it sounds like it's okay, maybe, but I know how that's going to turn into, what that's going to turn into ultimately. You know, so I am very opposed to this. Also, I'm wondering about, and the traffic was brought up. 84 is a 2-lane highway. There is no way that that is going to be enough to accommodate what is being proposed right now. I can see that that's absolutely going to have to be widened, and there is a big concern with traffic. Not to mention safety. We have a lot of children in the Newell Creek area as well, and bringing in a lot of extra traffic, people, whatnot. We have to think about the safety as well of our children. So you as city planners should be thinking about this. So, and that's pretty much all I have to say. It's just very disappointing to me that this would even be considered at this point, and why a bigger priority on green space is not being considered by the city. Thank you.
Mr. Zeman, go through it one more time, will you please? The fact that anybody can bring forward an idea.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you can, as I said, you can own an acre or less or 1,000 acres. If you make application for rezoning, you're entitled to your due process, so to speak, entitled to this public hearing here in front of the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission makes a recommendation to the City Council. The City Council will then hold another public hearing and make a decision as to passage of an ordinance or not. Again, in this particular case, if the City Council were to pass an ordinance, it ultimately would be decided on at a referendum by the voters of the entire city.
Okay, thank you.
And just to reiterate, if that were the case with 1 acre, that could be the case with a 1 acre parcel. The rules are, obviously there's a huge, very large scale development that's proposed, but again, a property owner is a property owner, and they have a equal level playing field in that regard.
Okay, thank you. Tina Oland.
Hi, my name is Tina, and I grew up in Menor. I graduated from Menor High in 1987, and I don't know the school population now anymore, but there was like 900 kids when I graduated, and with all these developments, there's got to be more kids. Instead of all new homes and shopping centers, why don't you build a Menor High north and south?
I think that would be a question that would be best directed at the schools.
Okay, it's just, you know, a request. And with the Boltons, I hope to God their house is going to stand there, because Menor tears down every historic house there is. I mean, I take pictures of all these homes before they're torn down. You want to tear down Echo Hill Farm on Garfield Road and make it a subdivision, $500,000 homes. There's a horse land on the corner, or not on the corner, but right by Plaza Boulevard and 84. I've heard all this stuff I read in the News Herald.
So we know it's true.
Yeah. And they're talking about a hotel on the corner of Bellflower and 615. There's no room for a hotel there.
That was turned down last night by council.
Okay. And the Sawyer House and the Reed House that's next door to the Menor Public Library, there was talk about tearing those down. I've seen worse houses in worse conditions that have been fixed up. Those are historical, just like the Echo Hill Farms. Can't we leave any history and green space here in Menor instead of overdeveloping? I mean, it's really getting bad, the traffic.
I'm going to ask Mr. Zeman one more time to talk about Echo Hill. Go ahead.
In terms of preservation,
In terms of tearing down the house.
the city does, it's private property. If you come in and you pull a demo permit, you're entitled to demolish your structure in the city of Mentor.
So that's not something that the city's in favor of necessarily. That's something that the property owner wants to do.
But can't you tell them no?
No.
No.
And like you guys, well, there's a talk about a development where Rice Elementary is. There's no room for homes there. I mean, the space is so small that everybody picks to develop. And one thing about the Bolton House, like I said, I hope their mansion stays. That would be a good place for a bed and breakfast, for people to have wedding pictures taken. I think the whole place should be a park, in my opinion. And we don't need more retail because we have plenty of vacancies, you know, with the mall. And if you guys put something like a Legacy Village or Crocker Park there, it's going to make the mall go under. So that's how I feel about all this.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for the comments. Okay. Gracie Cedarland.
My name is Tracy Cedarlin, and I reside at 7455 Johnny Cake Ridge Road. I am very opposed to this. I'm listening to the other residents, and they have covered a lot of what I would have liked to have said. So now I'm going to come back to you. I did not come in receipt of this paperwork until about noon today. I went on the website because I wanted to see, I like to use facts and details when I come and talk to people about something as serious as this. I don't know how much you all went through this, but one of the questions about the house, I outlined a couple of arguments about the house. It's one thing that we're going to try to change the rezoning, because once that is passed, whoever develops this land is going to do whatever they want to do. I'm proud to stand here today and tell you that I supported the Norton property, and I fought with so many other residents in Mentor to have that levy fail. And that issue failed, and then City Council went behind our backs and had it developed anyway. I am going to fight for this property also to not be rezoned. And if it is rezoned, it needs to be rezoned differently than what the family's asking. And more research has to be done. My big problem with this right now is I'm hearing everybody talk about the trees, the trees, the trees. Do any of you, has anybody on this committee in Mentor, because if you're going to approve this and put this on a ballot, are you aware that once you do that, and if you don't give the citizens the truth about the whole matter, okay, you're talking about the trees. I have been a volunteer at the Holden Arboretum since 2001, and I'm here to tell you that once they start digging up that beautiful land and you start destroying the root structure of those 200-year-old trees, you're not going to have those 200-year-old trees. And my husband and I sat on the computer for an hour today trying to figure out this whole diagram, because the way you have it, A, B, C, D, or whatever, and this isn't even the Boltons, because it's going to come down to you and telling the residents the truth. And the way this is set up, it's going to be butting up against this conservation land, which means that there's going to be a bunch of trucks and a bunch of all kinds of machinery digging up those tree roots, and those trees will be destroyed. And I don't know how many of you know how to tell how far a root structure goes from a tree. But when you go home tonight or tomorrow when it's light out and you find the tallest tree you can find, you do with your eyes and you make a line all the way out till you can't see it anymore, and that's where the tree roots are. So I have never been on the Bolton property, but if there's a 200-year-old tree there, I'm telling you that there's going to be a huge root structure that goes way beyond these diagrams that are presented to you. So before this goes any further, I think this city, if you're going to go ahead and ask residents to vote for a rezone, you need to do your homework to find out exactly what's going to happen here. Because the Boltons have said they want this land to be conserved so people can enjoy it. So I think not only should somebody go out there and look at the property and how far the tree roots go, but then a barrier needs to be put up. And then if you want to build from the barrier on, then maybe you'd have to look at rezoning differently. There's a lot more stuff in here that we highlighted, and I'm not going to take all this time tonight because there's way too much. But I found little details in here about the house too. And it's very upsetting because it's even in here, the wording. And I think I don't know which paper I have it on, but it was worded that they may be able to keep the home, and it should be worded that they shall keep the home, because the home is the history of that property. And there's a lot of history with the Bolton family, and people in this area don't even know how much there is. And it needs to be preserved, and they need to be honored and respected for what they did for this community. There's nothing wrong with having green space. Menor doesn't have any more green space. Maybe you should be more concerned about being in the world instead of a part of the world, and not do what everybody else around us is doing, and sit down with this family and do what's right. Because once this is changed, any developer can do whatever they want to do, because I watched it with the Norton property, and it made me sick. And I think the same thing's going to happen with the Bolton property. And that's all I have to say.
That's all the pink sheets I have. Does anybody else in the audience want to speak? Okay, we'll close the public portion. We'll invite this gentleman back up.
Mr. Stone?
Go right ahead.
Just to be clear, when the public portion is closed, that means, I think maybe just so the residents who might not be familiar with the process could be reminded, if I may, once the public hearing is closed, they're not permitted to speak again at this hearing. So maybe having reiterated that to folks, I'd, request your, just double check perhaps, just to make sure.
Anyone wishing to speak? I need you back at the microphone.
All right, he comes up first, then the public speaks. Then you close us, and then he gets to speak again. That's not fair. He gets the 2 times up, we get 2 times up. This is bullshit, excuse my language.
Wow. That's the way it is, sir. So we'll close the public portion.
No, wait.
Just want to point out that a lot of talk has been the 69 acres, the 69 acres, the 69 acres. But just a little bit smoke and mirrors seem to me, because really it's just, it was pointed out once or twice briefly, but it's more like the 35 acres only of Menor will actually be preserved. But just a comment.
I need your name for the record.
Ed Wasner,
And the address.
9360 Corning Avenue.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So my question is, when they put the mounds of dirt around there that we look at, shortly after that, well, when we bought our property, we were told by our real estate agent that it was zoned for small acre increments. It can never be rezoned unless that wetland was dried out. How did they dry the wetland out? I can tell you, when the pasture is divided down the center, there was a pump there, because you could see the pipe coming out where the water was being pumped out of that land. Explain to us where that wetland was relocated to on the property.
Got to ask a question. How I said I wanted their house to be preserved and it's a landmark. There's a house by 90.
This way.
I'm sorry. There's a house by 90, and you can't see it when there's a bunch of leaves. But when the leaves are down and it's winter, it's like an old stone house. Is that going to stay there? Because that's beautiful.
You're on.
All right. Okay, yep. So that house, maybe Larry could help me, is in the Kirtland Hills piece. So it's not part. It's actually right on this plan. It's right where the Kirtland Hill label is. Right. Yeah.
Right there.
Okay. So that's in Kirtland Hills. So that's nothing we have any jurisdiction over.
You have any idea if they would save it?
We don't. I think that is part of whatever happens on the south end, but it's in the Kirtland Hills part, so it would.
Because it looks pretty from the freeway.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. Now we'll close the public portion. Anything else you'd like to make, comment on?
I'm happy to. I'm trying to think about the different questions. I'm happy to address any that
Okay.
you'd like me to.
I'll entertain a motion from the commissioner members. Anybody want to make a comment?
I have some questions.
Sure.
If you don't mind. Mr. Chairman? I think one of the first things I'd like to focus on is the Bolton residents. It's been shown as part of sub-area B, except it really shares no characteristics with the development of that area. So just from amending the proposal, I'd like to see the Bolton residents, that semicircular area, to be its own sub-area, with its own requirements, its own goals and objectives, because it really doesn't share that with the rest of that development. The rest of that development is all brand new. It's all, bulldozer blade in the ground and all new construction up. This is a whole area that wants to be preserved. I think people want it preserved, but I would like to see it preserved. And so I'd like to see it as a separate area just to be dealt with within this proposal. I mean, I just thought myself about the fact that, and some folks have mentioned some things, that it can be a bread and breakfast, it could be a boutique hotel, it could be a new hotel and use the existing building as part of the common facilities, the lobbies, the meeting rooms and stuff. It could be a day spa, it could be a residential spa. It could be a high-end restaurant with meeting rooms. It could be a conference center. And it could be a neighborhood and community center for programs that would benefit this community and the city of Mentor. Those are just off the top of my head. And because it has direct relationship with the conservation area, I would like to see the proposal at least altered to reflect that. There's another item I'd like to speak to is there's a conceptual use plan, page 49. And I don't know if you can actually put that up. My concern is that 49, there you go. And, okay, well, that doesn't have the little flags, the little bubbles that were on there. There you go. And my concern with this, because we're trying to, we're trying to see what's being proposed, what can we depend on, what's real, what's. So some of these things, like this, for instance, says it's single-family development, there's no question about it. But right here, it says potential. It doesn't say that it's actually part of the plan or part of the development. It says potentially part of the development, which to me is, it's not just there. There's the potential here. There's a potential townhouse location, potential offices, potential hotel, grocery store. So my concern is that even though you're presenting this as a plan, as a detailed plan, there's still clearly components of it that are just maybe. It's very speculative. And so I would, before I could approve a plan, I'd have to know what the plan was, or what it's actually proposing to be. So I think, and I'm not trying to tell you what to do to resolve that, other than the fact that I think we need to remove from the plan things that are so speculative that they're not really part of the plan. There's that item. I have a question just in general, and anyone can respond, the planning department or even our attorney. There are common areas within these plans. Areas that, the berms, for instance, is a common area. There's a lot of walks, there's a wetland area, there's a few small parks. There's a entry area now that I like, that little entry park area. And there's a multitude of landscaping features that are around the area. Who, is this common area, and who maintains this? Is it going to, is this, I mean, you can answer this now if you'd like. I mean, how does that fit into the ownership of these properties? The common spaces, whose responsibility, whose financial responsibility to maintain?
The green spaces we're showing, the common spaces are part of the development unless there would, and there could be discussion between the city about whether they're public parks or aren't formal public parks dedicated to the city. That's a possibility. There's interest on both parties. But we're showing these common spaces, green spaces, as organizing elements of the various parts of the project. But, so it's a good question. I think the berm area is part of the development, but the trails would be publicly accessible.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to figure out in my own head is, is this, if this is common, would there be a property owners association? I mean, not just homeowners association, some people might be familiar with those. Would there be a property owners association that would be responsible, and that would include the offices, the commercial, the retail, the residential? I mean, and I guess what I'm getting at is that it's hard for me to feel confident that I know how this plan would be developed. By the time it would get in front of the voters, I think they'd need to have that answer, because if they vote for something like this, they're actually, the city now becomes responsible for some of this plan. So just a clarification, it's not clear enough to me.
I understand, that's a good point.
Another item, and excuse me for going into all these things, but I'm kind of detail focused on this right now. So the parking is, I brought up parking before, and parking will probably always be an issue in a discussion with these reviews. I saw the documentation, and I saw that basically we were creating parking discounts relative to the required parking for different kinds of units, of offices, and it was based on the idea that you'd be sharing space, nighttime versus daytime use, weekend versus week use, and that's a valid concept. I'm not questioning that. However, the examples that were used suggested things like, weekday use could be used like a parking for a church. I don't see a church on this plan. Parking for a movie theater that would be used at night. I don't see a movie theater. Now, I know there's undefined retail and commercial space, but if those kinds of things don't show up, you can't do the parking sharing. You can't achieve those goals between nighttime and daytime use, between weekday and weekend use. So my concern is that as this gets built out based on feasibility, we could get into a situation where we can't provide enough parking for what gets built. There won't be enough space. So I think somehow that has to be addressed further with more definitive statements to understand how this happens, because down the road, we're only going to see these projects one at a time for review. And yet this parking could be a problem for the entire project, the feasibility of it. And so I have a concern here. That parking is a big concern. I mentioned it the last time, at the last meeting. I'm mentioning it now. I don't see the statements made about parking to be sufficient enough to have faith that this will work. I agree with the concept, the premise. I just don't see it in the plan that there's anything that's going to guarantee that that'll work, that the numbers will work at the end. I'm going to kind of, we've already, the citizens have already mentioned the issue about the roads around the side, the Johnny Cake and Center Street. I agree with everything everybody said about Johnny Cake. Any time of the day, you have to wait for that light. There's always a line. There's always traffic. No. You're done now. I'm talking. But there's always a problem with traffic there. And I know you wait for a further level to get into the real detailed traffic. My concern is that there's going to be a problem. It's going to have to be resolved. Development can solve some of these problems. Okay. Who's going to pay for that? Who's going to pay for the widening, maybe, of all of Johnny Cake? Who's going to pay for extra traffic signals and turning lanes? And I ask that as much to you as I do to the city. Is the city prepared to pay for some of these things, or is it all going to be on the developers? Can you answer that question? Who's going to pay for all these improvements in the two major right-of-ways?
Typically, there's improvements at intersections as part of development. That the development pays for. Mm-hmm. If it goes beyond that to entire widening of the roadway, obviously, as you guys are all talking about, the traffic there isn't the response. It wasn't created by this piece of ground, obviously.
No.
So there's a bigger public issue there that exists and needs to be addressed at a city level because it's a city level problem.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted it stated. I mean, I'm not trying to resolve it one way or the other, but to the degree that there's already some measurable problems with traffic flow, especially on Johnny Cake, This isn't going to make it less. It's only going to make it more. So I'd like you to just talk about the alleyways.
Sure.
Just how are they going to work? Are you using these for utility access points too? Or is it going to, I think you mentioned they're not going to be dedicated right-of-ways. But also I think I'd like to hear you talk about whether all these streets are dedicated streets, or just speak about
Great question.
talk about the streets and what's dedicated and what's not.
We're expecting this to be a mix of public and private roadways, and it hasn't been completely determined yet exactly what that mix is. But the alleys would make sense to be private, in part because they're going to be narrow and it's a little different than what the normal city standards are. Some of the larger streets probably make sense to be public streets because they're providing public connection, public access. But that's a level we would need to determine at the final development plan stage. But we're also providing, I think, the character, typology of what the streets are going to be. And if they're obviously built as part of the development. They'd have to meet city standards even if they got turned over to the city once it became public.
Is it your view that the alleyways they're private, would they be commonly owned as private, or would they be the responsibility of the adjacent homeowners?
They'd be they'd probably most likely be commonly owned.
Okay, I'm just asking, just to kind of answer some of these questions.
Absolutely.
Let the question float out there, or the answer float out there. I've always had a question, I didn't bring this up the last time, about the pedestrian walkways and the berms. I see in the plans these serpentine walkways that go through the berm areas, and, well, I'm not going to be able to walk up that berm, okay? So I'm not sure how that works, just from a functional point of view.
That's fair. I think there's a lot
And
of
some of
artistic
it's on
license.
the outside, some of it's on the inside. When you're on the inside, are you in somebody's backyard or close to it? And what would the value of that be, to be walking through people's backyards? Or are you walking at the top of the berm? You're walking, okay, just address that as a design issue.
Yeah. I imagine they would be on the public street side of the berm. You're right, we're not going up and down the berms.
Because that's what your drawing shows.
Yeah, we'll clean that up.
Okay.
Do you want me to go back and answer any of the?
I just had one other thing. Let's see. I had a desire to want to see a central open town space, and I think you kind of defined an entry space that next to the main entrance, and I appreciate that, and I think that maybe helps deal with that. Just the idea in open space in general, and that is that I know there's a statement in the literature that says that you're using all the conservation space as open space relative to the plan. From an accounting point of view of space, I understand exactly what you're talking about. From a livability point of view, I think there needs to be more open space within the development, especially the residential, because the units are getting close together, which is another issue, but we'll talk about that. I think there needs to be more pocket parks or, street park or green space associated with all these walking areas to remove the density that is kind of implied by some of these areas. And so I would like to see a further development of the plan that reflects some of this open space. I understand, especially if I don't even want to use the word if. The Bolton space, the one I'd like to see as another sub-area, that is a significant open space, and it is open to lots of the residential area, and that's great. But I'd like to see more relief in the residential areas for that. So I had a couple notes. You mentioned the village center in your presentation, and where do you consider that to be?
The village center is really sub-area B, I would call that entire.
You mean you're
area.
talking about as a whole area, a zone rather than a specific place?
Yeah, I'm trying to evoke the kind of feeling and space that we're trying to create sub-area B.
Because you did mention, too, about a central gathering place, and my first response is where would that be?
Sure, so the central gathering space is, right where Larry's showing. It's on center. This goes.
It's this area right here.
Right, and this goes
Okay.
to answer
Over here,
some of your
right.
questions. we talked about putting it deeper into the project. Part of the reason, the logic of putting it there was because we want it to be a community gathering space, not just for this development. And we thought some transparency and visibility from Center Street would make it feel more communal rather than just part of this development. That was one of the reasons of putting it there. Also, it kind of plays off of the trail on the existing Bolton Resident Drive, which we want to turn into trail access to the estate.
Okay. No, that's what I had right now.
If I might too, good points about the sub area. Our reasoning for putting the Bolton house in sub area B was just because the uses, bed and breakfast, hotel, conference center, weren't in sub area A. So we attached it to sub area B, but totally understand
But
what
I
you're
see
saying.
that
And
the
idea of
significance of new construction and new design versus restoration, renovation, additions, preservation.
Yep.
That's why I'd want to see that as a separate area
Makes sense.
in a revised proposal.
makes complete sense.
Thank you.
I have a question. I brought it up at the last meeting. You don't have a developer yet, right?
Correct. The Boltons would probably partner with developers, and so those would need to be identified. And
Okay.
they'd probably be different depending on where we are.
So what happens when we have a facility that the developer says, I can't do what the plan says?
So-
How do we get around that?
Yes.
I'm not suggesting we want to get around that, but how do we get around that?
So and that goes back to actually answering some of the early questions on the potential. What we're showing, uses, densities, heights, block patterns, that's what we're trying to convey. The reality is, depending on the market, we talk about just sub-area A, we have these 4 different housing typologies. The mix may adjust depending on where the market is. The townhomes, there might be more townhomes.
Actually, I'm more concerned with the commercial and that type of activity, retail.
So it might be easier. Going back, there was a diagram that had the red, dark red, and the lighter red.
I want to be sure that we don't wind up
One more.
with a fast food restaurant in this
I
development.
understand. One more after that. So what we put into the development text, again, we're not going through the individual text, but the point is here in sub-area B that there's building frames along the streets. And so the buildings will be up to the street, and the parking will be center to those blocks so that you don't experience it. There'll probably be little alleyways or vias between buildings. What each building is and exactly how long that building is and whether it's 2 stories or 3 stories is going to depend. That's where the market and the use comes in. So what we definitely want to anchor the corners with retail on the first floor, whether it be residential above or commercial office above would depend on the market. Building might stretch further down the block with some more architecture, which you all get to review at the final development plan stage.
So I have a question for the administration then. How can I be sure that we won't have a fast food restaurant in there?
With the drive-through and
the
parking
drive-through.
all around the building.
Right now, under the list of the schedule of permitted uses, drive-throughs are not listed as permissible.
But fast food restaurants.
Yeah, what about fast food?
Well, I mean, that could be something that could be added as a condition, but as you know, when you have listed restaurants, you can't restrict the specific brand of restaurant. You can allow for restaurants. If you want specific criteria, then that would have to be stipulated as a condition of approval.
But all walk-up, no drive-through.
Walk up. I mean, to create the walkability environment that's desired, the drive-through doesn't fit that concept.
I'm just being the devil's advocate here. 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, when the developer says, I tried, I can't get the job done, how can I be sure that he won't swing this way with a fast food restaurant?
Well, I mean, as you know, if there's an amendment to a plan, there's a process for that. And it would have to go through any kind of review. Now, you're talking, I would say, an amendment to the text, which is a different scenario.
You know, Newell Creek's come up several times this evening, and Newell Creek had proffers that existed with it. So there's certain things retail-wise that could not go in, certain things that could go in. So I want to be sure that we don't wind up with something that's going in that we don't want.
I mean, we don't want to face this 3 years from now when the property is defined, it's zoned properly, the gentleman comes in and has every right to put something in that none of us want to see there. But he'll have every right at that point, unless we can define what's in there now and what's not allowed in there now, before we get 2 years from now and we have a fight about acceptable zoning.
We didn't discern against what type of restaurants, thinking that the fact that you would have a building up on the street next to the sidewalk and parking behind, going to only appeal to certain kind. You're not going to get the drive-through restaurant fast food. Now, if you got a fast food style restaurant, Chipotle, that was interested in that kind of, layout, I think we'd be okay. Our thought, we're okay with that as long as the form fits. But I mean, if you're saying
No, I'm not judging the food.
okay,
I'm just judging the fact that I don't want to see a traditional fast food
food
restaurant. I want, if they can meet the design criteria that's well-defined enough to be a storefront type walk-up within the architectural materials of the development, if they can fit their, if there's a demand and they can do that, that's fine. I just don't want to be faced with a plot of land that's zoned properly, and the guy says, I have every right to put in there whatever I want.
Understand.
We need to restrict it now, or at least make it clear in the plan. And I'm throwing this back to you. It's got to be in the plan now for us to feel comfortable to approve, to advance down the road for the, and no one's going to vote for it if they don't see that there's those safeguards.
okay.
It's my opinion that no one will vote for it without those safeguards.
So,
Gentlemen, something?
Mr. Chairman,
yes.
piggybacking on that, I've seen on the plans and in the paperwork, a couple spots mention supermarket. Parking for a supermarket, how does that work?
So we were thinking that it would, again, it might not be possible, but we would allow the potential for what we would call a specialty grocery. Now, you've already got limits in the PUD and the plan development text on the maximum square footage. So this would be a smaller specialty grocery store because it can't, big box scale development of any kind is not allowed in your plan development text. But we did want to allow that use in case we could attract a specialty grocery to be part of the development.
So a specialty grocer is about 25% the size.
I need
Come up to the
you back in
microphone.
the mic.
A specialty grocer is about 25% the size of a typical grocery store that you see in the market. So you're talking about 20 to 30,000 square feet. It's a very much smaller product with a smaller parking demand.
So,
Jeff Pongonis from MKSK.
okay. Anything else you'd like to add, administration?
Well, we'd like to talk about, or have them talk about some of the conditions that the staff had recommended with regard to
Yes.
the number of units
Space.
versus what we counted on the plan versus what's actually listed in the table. Obviously, it's adhering to density requirements, but just, again, so that it's clear to everybody what's in the plan, where do you account for those unit counts?
Great. So in sub-area A, I think as staff pointed out, we've shown 180 individual lots. And we put a range of 180 to 300 units in, I think, the text, with a thought, again, responding back to depending on where the market is, and depending on what unit type, it could go up, and they could be a little bit tighter together, or it could be something like this, or it could even go down, because I don't think you'd be opposed if the unit count goes down. But the point was to provide some flexibility to the market. Now, the plan development text allows up to 8 units an acre. At the 180 that we're showing here, we're at 2.7 units an acre. At the 300 that we had at the upper end, the maximum amount in the text for sub-area A, that gets you to 4.2 units an acre, so you're still half of the density allowed in the plan development text.
Just out of curiosity, maybe the administration could answer this question. On Newell Creek, how many units are over there?
In Newell Creek, a maximum of 705 residential units
And
are
how many were
permitted.
built?
Right now, to date, a total of 466 sublots have been developed.
Okay. And what was the overall acreage of that development?
The overall acreage is 355 acres, but the area that's strictly residential, the north side of Norton Parkway, is 240.
Okay, so we're at considerably more acreage here and a little higher density, is that correct?
Yes.
Well, some overall smaller acreage.
The acreage here is less than
Yeah.
the acreage of the residential.
Yeah.
Following that discussion about the fact that the market may vary what can be built, is there a way that you could show two plans? One showing the high end in one type of development, one showing the largest on the other side of in order to define the limits, bracket it, so that everyone would know as best as possible that becomes a detailed plan rather than a conceptual plan. And so I'm trying to find ways to make it a detailed plan. But if what you're showing me could be this way, could be that way, could be this potential, could not, in order to be a detailed plan that I could feel comfortable voting for, I need to see more of these details, or at least the range in what we're approving. Thank you. I just gave him a lot more work to do.
Anything else?
Not for me.
Just one clarification on sub-area A. You made reference to the text allows you to be 60 feet, but you'll only be 40 feet in height.
Yes.
I just would like to see that cleaned up in the text. If that's what you're intending, let's say it.
Absolutely.
And the only other, and you don't even have to answer this, I guess I just want to state it. The traffic on 84 concerns me. I actually live down the road from there, and I know exactly what everybody here is talking about. To have these two exits onto 84, I'm not sure I totally agree with this road, the way it is, that spreads the traffic. All the traffic on 84 goes to 615. So it doesn't matter if you have 2, 1, 7, they're all going to 615. I don't know the answer.
Okay.
It's just, I'm just not comfortable with dumping more traffic into 84.
That was a comment I made at the last meeting, too, is that the two exits start to become, in my mind, somewhat problematic. If we look at Norton development, there's the one major entrance that's defined, that's open,
Yeah.
people can see coming and going. We got a berm on both sides of both, we got to deal with all those aspects of making however we interface with 84 to be a reasonable interface. And if you're blinded by berms and you come out, then you turn and you drive for 2 seconds, and there's another road coming out with people coming and turning the other way. I still want that thought process about the two on. I'm not saying you can't get onto the 84, but I think if you look at what Norton did and what their development on the same street with the same kind of loads of traffic, I think it would be much more problematic if there were multiple exits.
If I could address that.
Sure, go ahead.
So, for instance, let's say we took that approach, which makes, conversationally, I understand that. If we were to, let's say this development were to have one kind of primary access along Norton, if anyone wants...
Johnny Cake.
No, I'm along Center at Norton.
Okay.
Let's say folks did want to head east along Johnny Cake. We would be forcing everyone into that intersection at Johnny Cake and Center. What we'd like to do is disperse traffic and not force everyone to that point of contact. So you're giving people an opportunity to avoid
I understand exactly what you're saying.
intersections.
I get it, but I think...
Both exits are going and turning and dumping into the same major intersection. Everyone is going to go east. Very few people are going to go west. Excuse me.
West, everybody's going west.
Everybody's going west. Very few people are going east. Now you have two intersections of that traffic
Right.
flow
I
rather than
understand.
one. And
Just one other comment on as you think this through. you also have to be careful on the other side, because of the traffic at 84 and 615, you're just going to create an easy cut-through that I don't have to wait in the traffic line. So you just got to be careful how you design that.
So what I'm hearing is that you might be supportive, pending traffic study, everything else, of having one access on Johnny Cake. There's more like Knoll Creek.
Just keep it simple.
Yeah. Yes. I guess the other thing, just again, a reminder that Street A, which would have a name, but Street A, security is through there and would have on-street parking. Stop signs. And stop signs. Yeah, all along there. So I don't know that it would be a great.
I just say,
cut
just
through.
think,
Yeah.
it sounds like you
Yeah, yeah.
have,
Yeah.
but just think that through.
No.
You're out of order, sir. Anything else from the commission?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
For me, sub-area B and C, every building that wants to get built there, the planning commission, we're gonna get a look at that. My concern is on the residential, because, 30 nice houses get built, and then all of a sudden, we have a bit of a downturn or something, and then the architectural standards are lessened. So I'd like to see like an architectural review board with the HOA that works in conjunction with the planning commission during the initial plan submittal, so that we can maintain, the architecture of the houses. And, to wrap your head around this 0 setback and 3-foot side setbacks, we don't have neighborhoods like that in Mentor. Now, I did go on and look at some, and done right, they look great. It's not where I live, but it does look great. I actually found a neighborhood in Maryland that looked real nice. So I think it can be done real well, but I just don't think it can get out of hand.
Just to remind ourselves that we would also review multiple unit buildings.
Right.
Planning
The
commission.
townhomes.
The townhomes attached.
But it's that single-family
Right,
home.
it's the single-family ones we
that
don't
we
review.
don't get to see.
That's right.
So if somehow we could be involved in that process. And I don't know what that, because we don't really have a process for that right now.
Well, we do have the design standards that we've never used before that are in this new set of regulations, and that was part of the point of the plan development regulations, was to incorporate design standards, because that was very important to commission and council. So those design standards will have to be incorporated and be a part of every review of every home that goes.
And the city will do that.
Absolutely.
That'll be your responsibility.
Yes.
to do
And
that.
that's percentage of brick, natural stone, et cetera, all that.
That's why it's in there.
Okay, that's good.
They are, just to compliment staff and you all, they're very extensive compared to other communities we work in. So
Never been tested.
What's the pleasure?
I know you guys don't want to hear this, but because of the suggestions that I've made and other people that would like more detailed information, I'm not speaking for everybody, but I'd like to table this to get the revisions or the updated information made, so that we don't make any decision today, to the next meeting or whenever you'd like to do that.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. Jess, when you're ready.
Mr. Tiedemann?
Yes.
Mr. Varga?
Yes.
Mr. Cicero?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mr. Sidoti?
Yes.
Mr. Snow?
Yes. You have all the information you need?
thank you very much. Yes, I think between all of us, we've taken a lot of notes. Thank you for your input.
Okay, that concludes the meeting. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved.
And just for the audience, the session's